introduce our speaker, Kostas Glinos. So thank you very much for joining us, Kostas. For those of you who haven't met Kostas, he's head of unit for the Open Science unit in DG Research. So we're delighted that he's joined us to give this second keynote talk on driving the paradigm shift towards open science. So the unit that Kostas runs in DG Research has got policy responsibility for the European Open Science Cloud and also data management policies. And so you'll be hearing some updates from Kostas about those aspects and many more throughout this talk. It will be about 40 to 45 minutes, and that will also leave us some time at the end for questions as well. And I would also add that before Kostas took over responsibility for the Open Science unit in DG Research, he was previously head of unit for the International Cooperation unit, and before that for the E-Infrastructures unit in DG Connect. So his knowledge of ELIXIR goes back a long way, many, many years. So Kostas, thank you for joining us, and I'll pass now directly to you to start your talk.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the introduction, Andy, and thank you for the invitation. Very glad to be here and to present to you and have a discussion and reply to your questions. Next slide, please. Everything today becomes digitally enabled or data-driven, and we see these tremendous increases, whether it is in the data volume or the value of the data economy. So this, as we all know, transforms us, transforms our lives, our economies in good and sometimes less good ways. It transforms science as well. Especially computational biology, omics, I mean, the areas that ELIXIR is active in, lead this transformation is something that I think your community is one of the good ones. You know this happening for many, many years. Now, what is open science in that respect? Next slide, please. In a way, it is about using information technology, using digital tools to unlock information flows, so that as to make the system, the scientific system, far more efficient, more creative, more high quality. So very often we say open science means sharing knowledge and tools as early as possible in the research process and not just at the end of the process. And this sharing to take place between researchers, obviously, but also, which is far more difficult, in an interdisciplinary way across disciplines and with society at large. Why are we doing this? We do this because we need to harness this transformation, this digital transformation of science, so that we have a much better system at the end. And we do it because we really believe that open science is better science. It's more efficient. It results in higher quality outcomes. We have many examples of this. The recent crisis, the current crisis with the pandemic, gives us several good examples. Everybody turned themselves to openness at the beginning of the crisis, because it is almost intuitive that by having data results, software and so on shared as soon as possible, research on cures and vaccines and approaches to manage the pandemic will be accelerated. We have seen it in the over the last 5 or more years with the so-called reproducibility crisis, about which we have read a lot, that it's not the only thing, but one of the cures, one of the approaches to manage reproducibility is openness and transparency in the research process. We see it in studies that we procure, that about, for example, the amount of money that are being lost in the European economy because of data being non-fair, non-findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. This is 4 years ago, a study that gave us this result of about 10 billion euros per year in lost opportunity costs. Next slide, please. So what are we doing in the Commission? What are the areas when we say that we try to manage the transition to digital science, or we're dealing with open science? What are we concretely doing? One aspect is about improving the daily practice of research and innovation, the way research is being done. And there we have several topics that we look after. The probably oldest topic that is there since 2007, maybe 2006, is open access to scholarly publications. This is an area that has progressed a lot since then, in the last 10 or 15 years, but I have to admit that it advances quite slowly. The pandemic again has given it a big push, but we see for reasons that are well understood, but we see that the landscape of open access publishing is transforming itself, but at speeds that will require several more years in order to effect a complete transition. We are dealing with the early sharing of all research outputs. So open access, in other words, to data and other outputs like software, workflows, and so on. With research data management, so that all data and other outputs are findable, accessible, interoperable, usable. Since last year, we have started, and this is an area of significant challenge for us, is reproducibility. How, I mean, there are many studies that identify lack of reproducibility, which goes between 30 to 85%, depending on the scientific fields. So in other words, 30 to 85%, meaning that 30 to 85% of the conclusions of scientific papers published in that area cannot be verified and reproduced, which means that they cannot be with confidence reused by others, or which means that others have to repeat the experiments or have to collect the data again, and very often they come up with different results. There has been a lot of analysis on the causes of lack of reproducibility, and many of them relate to openness. For example, obvious ones like data are not accessible, so others cannot reproduce or verify, or software not being accessible, or simply the negative results not being published, or the publication bias or harking and so on. Many reasons. The question for us as policymakers is beyond what we are already doing. What are appropriate policy responses to reduce reproducibility, the lack of reproducibility? We have starting some look at this with our projects that we have funded in Horizon 2020, but we're still at the beginning. It looks, however, as a major area of endeavor for the future, because the amounts of money involved are tremendous. So if you're saying that, for example, in health research, the figure is that I have seen is 85% out of the 300 billion is not reproducible, which is quite worrying, and we need to see what policy responses we could develop in the future, both as funders as well as policymakers. We are also dealing with the more and more with the societal engagement and responsibility. We think that the science system in the long term is sustainable to the extent that the relation between, to the extent that there is trust by citizens and society in science, so that our economies can continue to spend significant amounts of taxpayer money in science. Therefore, when we define open science, also we define it as openness towards society as well. So there we are dealing with a number of aspects, and we're promoting a number of aspects. We are promoting the engagement of citizens in the design of research programs, and we're doing this now for the first time in the context of the definition of the missions in Horizon Europe for next year. We're dealing with, we're encouraging the involvement of citizens in the design of the objectives or the work plan of specific projects. Thirdly, with the involvement of citizens in science itself, so the so-called citizen science, with the crowdsourcing of problems, scientific, technological problems, and also with improving the capability, the capacity of researchers, their propensity to communication, scientific communication, to feel it as part of their duties, to explain to society. Society takes different, it has different instantiations. This here can be to their town, to their city, to even to their neighbors, or to the newspapers, or to their families, what science is about, what they are doing in terms of research. This is not always easy, and it's not, when I say we encourage it, it is not that we put as a condition to everything. For example, there are many areas in which it would not be feasible to involve citizens in doing the research, or to engage citizens in designing a research project. However, there are many other cases where it is feasible, and we would like this not to be seen as a condition or as a requirement, but rather as a reflex that how can I do this, what I'm trying to do, can I involve people outside my scientific community. So these are the different practices, and there are probably a few more. But on the other hand, to do those practices, we need also the proper environment. And some elements of this environment is the technological infrastructure to support open science in Europe and internationally. And this is our effort to build the European Open Science Cloud. It is another enabler is the skills, or the lack thereof of skills, skills by researchers, digital skills. You have here huge differences depending on the scientific domain, science area. But of course, not every researcher can be an expert in IT, an IT expert. What we need to develop is an infrastructure also in the institutions, in the universities, with the so-called data stewards, or whatever name you give to it, with people that are specifically trained to support researchers in managing, for example, their data. And then another enabler is and I'll come to this, I'll put more emphasis in a second, is the rewards and incentive system that will encourage the adoption of open science practices with appropriate metrics. And we have seen that so far, this is probably the greatest challenge of all. It is something that we do not reform the structure of rewards and incentives for open science, then open science will advance only very slowly. We have to do all these things, of course, by involving all the actors, all the stakeholders, and this, in our case, it means the member states of the EU and the associated countries. It means the funders in Europe, but also increasingly internationally. It means all the academic stakeholders, it means industry, and it means all the service providers. So it's a very broad and varied landscape, and we need, of course, to engage with all of those actors if we want to be successful, because we're trying to change the culture, essentially, of research, and the culture will change only if there is a significant extent of ownership by the actors involved, especially the scientific community. In open science, we engage also very much internationally. It is a topic that has made great progress in that sense in the last couple of years. We participated very actively from the European Commission to the discussions in UNESCO that started at the beginning of last year, and we were very pleased to see a few weeks ago the agreement for the draft proposal of UNESCO on a recommendation open science that is very wide-ranging and quite ambitious, much more ambitious actually than I could have dreamt when we started cooperating with them in this process in February 2020. It's not only UNESCO, it is basically everywhere, from the WHO to have a very good cooperation in the context of the G7 and open science working group under the G7, now under the British presidency of G7. We have many international bodies that are specifically aimed at data, like CODATA or like RDA, and we're involved with those and so on. So in short, the open science movement will be, of course, successful if science is global, only if it is also a global movement, and therefore we see it also as a necessity to engage with our colleagues outside Europe internationally. Next slide, please. Next one. Thank you. So in September, end of September last year, the Commission published a communication about a new era and European research area for research and innovation that sets a vision for the next years, and where there are a number of directions. One of them is about deepening the era and deepening the European research area, and there are 4 actions there that relate to open science that I would like to mention. One is about launching, which now have done in March, a platform for peer-reviewed open access publishing. So it is the so-called ORE platform. If you ask me, I can refer to it later on. It's a publication platform where any beneficiary of Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe in the future will be able to publish paper in any area, and it is a service provided free from the Commission, but it's not, and it is not a venue that you have to use. It's just another option in which the Commission tries to walk the talk. In other words, to show how we think modern, future-proof publishing should be. The platform was launched a couple of months ago and already has some papers on. You're welcome to look for it and see the papers and the way it functions. We do this through a subcontractor, F1000, that operates the publication platform. A second action is to analyze authors' rights to enable sharing of publicly funded peer-reviewed articles without restriction. So this is the general area of copyright, and there is maybe you know that there has been a copyright directive which has some specific articles about research, and which should be integrated into national legislation by 7th of June, actually. So the deadline is just passed. We need to look at the way this directive has been incorporated in the legislations of the different member states to see to what extent the application of the directive is such that will favor the retention of copyright by authors, which is something that we we force everybody to do in Horizon Europe, and for which we also have a general policy in favor, and if not, what would be corrective measures. Another action is the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, which and launching the related partnership that now have done. And then the fourth one is on which I'll talk a little bit in more detail, is to incentivize open science practices by reforming the research assessment system. In another chapter of the communication, we talk about citizen engagement, reflecting what I said earlier at the beginning of my talk, and propose specific actions or commit specific actions, like organizing with stakeholders and with member states citizen science campaigns, to crowdsourcing platforms, pan-European hackathons, and so on. Many of these in the context of Horizon Europe missions. There is one that it is already being launched about the plastic pirates in the context of the Clean Oceans mission. Next one, please. Okay, so a couple of words about research assessment and why we insist on it. In fact, this is 2021. We want to make it the year, maybe it's over ambitious what I'm saying, but we want to make it the year where the system change accelerated. In last year, in 2020, we have been very busy with laying out the rules or the modus operandi for Horizon Europe. It was not ready. Now we are ready, or almost ready, to launch Horizon Europe. We're extremely busy with EOSC, bringing EOSC to life. This is now launched. I'll come to this also in a second. We're also very busy with COVID-19. And this year, with 2021, we want to make the year where we really try to change the research assessment system. In what direction? So we have a system today that it is not compatible, consistent with what we're preaching, what we're saying, and not we only, the European Commission, but it is the same for most funders. So we have a system today that it is where excellence is largely defined on the basis of where researchers publish, so the famous GIF factor, so the venue or the publication, rather than reflecting the actual quality or impact of the publication. So we need to go to a more composite definition of excellence, that it's not just about where they publish, but about what is being published. The system is also, you have this publish or perish, especially in academia. It's a quantitative system. Especially young researchers feel enormous pressure in publishing as quickly and as much as possible, whereas we need to go to a system that incentivizes researchers to share knowledge, data, so a work that has to do with developing other things than publications, like models or software and so on, and then the sharing of this with your community afterwards is not being explicitly incentivized and is not taken into account in any of the established metrics. So we need to go into a system that it is more qualitative, includes maybe quantitative metrics as well, but it shifts away from this quantity-based evaluation. The system also today does not reward explicitly teamwork and collaboration, and this is it is more rewards competition, and it's an economy of prestige where you compete for prestige mainly by the place in which you manage to publish, and we need to go again to a system where it rewards stewardship and collaboration in the broader community. Next one, please. So these things are not new things. They have been discussed for very long time. Here it says Commission recommendation on 2018. But there have been it has been a lot of discussion for many years. The problem is that the system does not change, or rather, we have very good examples of change, but the change is slow, and we would like to accelerate this, and especially to stop this lack of coherence between what in real life and one within an institution or university a researcher is asked to do, or especially a young researcher by her supervisor, and what the general policy is, or what funders insist on. Next slide, please. So we started the process in the mid of March with a very wide consultation over 100 organizations on what should be the principles on the basis of which we would try to reform the system. We continue now with bilateral consultations. We'll be consulting dozens of stakeholders. We'll have such a meeting later on today. And the idea currently being to arrive at an agreement by the beginning of next year in the form of an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that would be signed by a coalition, that will reflect rather a coalition of the willing, and signed on the one hand by funders who are critical players in this system, and by research institutions, employers, in other words, of researchers on the other, a little bit like the DORA principles, except that it is a committal. So once you sign it, you have to commit it. You commit to implement it. You commit to implement specific things within specific time frames, and this will be monitored. So this is the current idea. It is a bottom-up thing. So in the sense that we're not going to force anything. I mean, we see ourselves in the Commission only as facilitator of the process. And one of the things we're trying to do is to identify the best forms of governance for a monitoring system, this coalition of the willing, if you want, how it can be brought together. Coalition S is one example of such, I mean, in a very different area, but it is one example of such coalition of people and funders that have self-organized themselves, determined to bring about change in the area of open access. So we are thinking of something similar in terms of governance, but not, of course, in terms of content. Next slide, please. Okay, I have next one. I think you all know about the European Open Science Cloud, so I will not talk about it really, because I think you had also discussion sessions in previous days. Next one. I'll run quickly over the slides. Next one. Yes, next one. Sorry. Maybe to say that, and this is an old slide I see, but maybe to say that in the summer you had the creation of the new EOSC association that its aim is to be the strategy body that represents all stakeholders for developing this infrastructure in Europe, that is now being set up. I mean, it had its first General Assembly in December 2020, and it's now set up. It just hired a General Secretary, it has elected a president, and so on. It has this 130 provisional members. I think it's not true anymore. I think there are 150 now. And for which we advise, we encourage all research institutions to engage with the association and to become members and participate in its work. It's of course only then that if it's really representative that it can be successful. Next one, please. Okay, and I think you had a fair amount of discussions on the COVID-19 data platform, for which ELIXIR was instrumental in setting up with a number of other partners, and that has done great strides towards addressing the problems of data access and interoperability for the disease, especially in genomics, and about which we also discussed on Monday, day before yesterday, at a workshop under the auspices of the Portuguese presidency of the European Union in Lisbon. Next one. Next one. So let me stop there. I mean, the last part of my talk will be about Horizon Europe. So here I'm pausing for a few minutes to ask ourselves whether we are making as much progress as we would have liked. In the COVID-19, or at least I am hearing from many sources that this was really a major push for open science. Everybody realized that this is the direction that we need to move. We have seen an increase in, which kind of expect, of course, an increase in the use of preprints with COVID-19 related results. It's not a tremendous increase. I mean, beyond the trend that you already had anyway of increase, there is a significant, however, increase for COVID-19 specifically papers. We have seen in the beginning of the pandemic about 20 representatives of countries or chief science advisors, including our own commissioner, Maria Gabriel, making a call to publishers to open up their papers that relate to COVID-19, which they did, or at least the big majority of publishers, they did at least temporarily, those that are closed access. So we have seen things like this, and many people saying it's unthinkable to go back and have these publications closed up again. But on the other hand, we have found also many challenges. I mention this very often because so that people are not dreaming too much, because I was struck by the Wellcome Trust paper that we saw published, that they looked at the PubMed Central, Europe PubMed Central, all the publications of COVID-19, whether they make their data available. And it's not only 9% that they have data availability statements in their publication for COVID-19. We have seen many cases where researchers do not sequence the virus, the genome of the virus, and do not make immediately results available. They don't publish the results. They wait to publish a paper first, and which implies a delay of several months or more than this. We have found, and I think this audience here knows much better than me, there are major challenges in the interoperability of data across sectors. I mean, from the health sector to the research, for example, sector, across countries, or because of legislation, but also due to issues of legal interoperability or semantic interoperability, but also technical interoperability, in the sense that we do not have agreed standards for sharing data in many cases. So these are major obstacles on which I'm not sure how much progress we're making. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is the first bullet on this. And then there are other issues that have crept in, let's say, in the last year or two. People talk more and more about the autonomy of the science system in Europe, about the ownership of data and infrastructure. In the In academic circles regarding taking up or jumping onto the open science train, we discussed. I know that it's discussed a lot of whether there is a first mover advantage by turning to open science, or whether it is best to leave others to do this. For instance, if you go entirely open access, institutions may be concerned that their rankings in terms of international university rankings, or their rankings as countries, could go down for obvious reasons, because these international rankings take GIF factors into account very often, and say, okay, I mean, we want to do it, but maybe not now, maybe wait till everybody else does it. So have a number of reflections there that we are only starting with, together with our partners. I think I have another 10 minutes, so I will quit this discussion to go to Horizon Europe.
Correct. Thanks, Kostas.
And to give you a short update there. So, okay, Horizon Europe is much larger than what Horizon 2020 was. This is 95.5 billion instead of 80, but actually it's the 80 is with the UK and 95 is without the UK. So which had a very significant fraction of this. So it is at least a third, I think, or 40% bigger than the previous program. Next one. The repartitions of money are not tremendously different, are more or less the same proportionally. So, but let's see how how open science has been factored in Horizon Europe. I mean, if you look at it historically, we started from 2008 with just a pilot on open access to publications. This moved progressively to open access became mandatory. 2014, we launched a pilot on data. In 2017, open data became the default with exceptions. And now in Horizon Europe, we try to make really open science the modus operandi of the entire program. This means that it will be present everywhere. Next slide, please. From the basic rules of the program, so how the contractual provisions in the grant agreements, to the template for drafting proposals, to the evaluation of proposals, the evaluation criteria, to the guidelines for running the projects, to publishing, to everything. Next one. In terms of research data, the basic principle is that the data should be managed responsibly in line with FAIR. We will have an evaluation of preliminary research data management considerations at proposal stage. For instance, if data are to be closed, we would like to know the reasons why there are no plans to make the data open, or there are no plans to reuse previously existing data. For example, they may not exist, but the proposal will need to state it. All projects will need to have a data management plan as a living document that they continuously update, and they will need to include this data management plan not only data sets, but also all other outputs. So it should be called an output management plan, all other outputs, including workflows, algorithms, models, software, and so on. They will need to deposit the data in a trusted repository and assure open access as soon as possible. They will have exceptions, and very valid exceptions, and can be many cases that the data should remain closed or remain closed for a certain period. But we would like to know what is the reason that the data remains closed. Next one. Next one again. I just talked about this too. So there is, for your community, it's not an issue. Your repositories, I mean, you are very computer literate, and I think, and you have like the ELIXIR deposition databases that are trusted repositories. It's not always the same for other communities. So we're making an effort to educate people on what it means to have a trusted repository, and a repository that assures the integrity and authenticity of its contents, that assigns PIDs and detailed metadata in a machine readable way, and so on and so forth. Next one. Okay, and then this is an issue that consumed maybe a year of discussion in the Commission and between the Commission and our member states on the on how should open science be evaluated, under which criterion. The decision at the end is that the open science should be evaluated as part of the proposal under the excellence criterion, or in a proposal under the methodology part, because we are saying that doing research in an open way is, it's a different process, improves the process of science and of research. And because methodology is under the excellence criterion, then this is where open science should be evaluated. It is also to some extent evaluated in the quality and efficiency of implementation criterion, because this is where you put the track record of participants in their CVs. So our evaluators will be looking, we're talking about incentives for open science earlier. So as funders, we need to provide these incentives. So our evaluators will be looking at the track record of proposers in sharing their work in any possible way, not just open access publications, but also sharing data, software, and so on. I think this was the last slide. Basically, yes, thank you very much for your attention.